Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You're in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Now, when we look at some of the most successful B2B brands today, they're creating compelling content, running video channels, and building engaged audiences just like media companies do. On this episode, we're going to explore why modern B2B companies need to think and operate like media companies in order to succeed. Here to break this down is Jon Leiberman, a veteran storyteller with over 25 years of experience bridging media, communications, and B2B marketing. As former VP of content at Demandbase, Jon built a global content operation that drove millions in pipeline revenue. He is also a SiriusXM host and professor of corporate storytelling, giving him unique insights into how B2B companies can adopt media principles to transform their marketing. Welcome to the show, Jon.
Jen, what an intro. I hope I can live up to it. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I'm so excited to have you on today and to talk about this topic. This feels like maybe a new but not so new-ish trend, something that, companies are doing more and more. And I'm just really thrilled to dive in a little deeper with you today.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's newish, but it shouldn't be, right? I think the companies that are doing it are finding that it's worth the investment, and companies that aren't doing it probably aren't doing it because either they don't understand how to derive, ROI out of content, or they're just scared to try something new. And I mean, you and I have heard this a lot. Companies always say, we want to be transformative. We want to push the envelope. But then when you try to push the envelope, it's like, no, back off a little bit because we're not quite ready to go there yet. So I think it's definitely an interesting time where I believe, at least, that every company should strive to be a media company in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you're right that, that inability to kind of capture the ROI of what you're doing is a big challenge. And like you said, the fear, there's so much pressure to kind of prove the value of what you're doing and that you're having an impact on the broader business. And so maybe we can demystify some of that for people today and give them some tips to get started.
I hope so. We'll do our best.
We will. So let's start from the beginning. What made you first realize that B2B companies needed to think more like publishers and media companies?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of had an epiphany. This was years ago. This might have been 12 or 14 years ago. So as you mentioned, I was in the media for many years. I worked at a number of TV stations across the country, including in my hometown of Baltimore. So shout out to Baltimore. And then I ended up at America's Most Wanted. And the catalyst for me to start thinking a little differently was I was a national correspondent at America's Most Wanted, and they were canceling the show on Fox. So that was an inflection point for me. And I sat down one day and I just said, you know what, how can I use these skills? At that point, it was 18 years in journalism or in TV and media of some sort. How can I use these skills in another way? And it clicked in my head that media and companies are all trying to do the same thing. They're trying to attract and retain an audience and then get them to act in some way. If you're in the media, you want them to consume your content, right? If you're in business, you want them to buy whatever it is you're selling or follow you on social or subscribe to your newsletter, whatever it is. So I sort of had this epiphany. It wasn't brain surgery, but this epiphany that, we're all just trying to attract and retain an audience. So what if I took kind of the media approach, which was in large part, depending on obviously who I was working for and what I was doing, the type of content, but some combination of informing, educating, and entertaining the audience. If I could come up with a way to put those three things together in terms of creating content for brands and helping them storytell, then I thought I would be onto something. So, long story now long, and Jen, interrupt me anytime. I started Leiberman Media, which was nothing more than basically a consultancy to talk to companies about storytelling. And some of my first clients were Callaway Golf, the great golf brand, and SAP, the behemoth technology brand. And it turned out, after working with SAP for a time, they ended up hiring me full time, and kind of the rest is history. I spent the last 10 years in that tech space, at the enterprise level, at the startup level, and really helping, companies and teams figure out ways to tell their story better, but also I'm always heavy on the video. And that's probably a bias because of my background in TV, but I just truly believe that if you aren't communicating to your audiences in different ways, audio, video, then you're just not going to reach them.
Yeah, that last point is a really important one about the video. I mean, people connect differently with humans in a video context as opposed to being forced to read all the time. Our attention spans are so much shorter today than they ever have been. And if you can't communicate something to me really quickly, then it's tough to kind of capture and retain that audience, as you say. But I think too, it's like there has been a shift in focus, like over that time, over those last 10 or 15 years, where that attracting and retaining the audience, as you described it, is becoming more important than converting them, which I think was like the B2B metric. That was the gold star metric, was that lead generation, that demand generation. And so how do you, 15 years ago, go into a company and say, it's not about that. You're going to get that conversion if you do these other things right. Like, how do you convert that mindset away from, I need to get somebody to spend money with me versus I need to engage somebody long-term?
12 years ago, 15 years ago, and today, it's still kind of a bit of a tough sell at times, because look, all companies want to drive revenue. They want to drive pipeline and all that. And unfortunately, in this environment, in my opinion, you can't lead with the hard sell. These are just different times. We live a life of scrolling and of liking and of deleting our emails, our cold emails, our inbounds and all that. And so I truly believe if you can get buy-in to this idea that first, let's just connect with the audience on some level. And you said the word human, and I love that, because I always say we're selling to humans, in marketing and sales. We're selling to humans. These are the same humans going home at night, or if they work from home, they're at home, watching Netflix, watching Hulu, they're on Instagram, they're on maybe TikTok or Snapchat or you name it. These are the people we're selling to, all the way from, and this can be controversial, but all levels, all the way up to the C-suite. You're never going to convince me that the C-suite isn't also on Instagram, on Facebook. These are the people. So the idea is, let's attract them. Let's get them interested in whatever story we're trying to tell. Then we try to just bring them into our universe. There have been great books written, like Tribe. Bring them into our tribe, and then at the right point in the buyer's journey, then we can try to sell to them whatever it is. But unfortunately, that's a slow-ish process. But in this day and age, I think you have to show the value first, then go after them as a customer. And then obviously to retain them is all of the other kind of marketing things. I mean, I think that, but to get them in the door, to get them into your pipeline, you have to get them interested in what you're talking about. And the way to do that, in my opinion, is provide them informative, engaging, entertaining content that is relevant to them. How many times, Jen, do we get emails that are so irrelevant to what we do professionally or personally that you just roll your eyes?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. I'm not exaggerating. I'm sure it happens to you too, dozens of times a week. I mean, I used a funny story when I was at Demandbase. We had a podcast, and we invited a lot of different thought leaders. And one day on LinkedIn, I got an invite. I might have even posted on LinkedIn and blacked out who it was. I got an invite that said, we're featuring the top female leaders in communications and marketing, and we would like to profile you and have you as a guest. And I'm like, top female leaders? I'm sorry, I'm not a female. Like, but it's stuff like that that is so irrelevant that that's why we alienate audiences.
Yeah, for sure. The personalization has, we have the technology to do it right. Like that is a very blatant error, right? That's going to turn you away. But something else you said, I think is really critical is like, before you do that hard sell, like how are you adding value? And showing that you have something to share and something that is going to be valuable to that target audience before they even spend any money with you is such a great proof point. When someone is ready to buy and they say, I'm already getting value from this relationship or this community or this content, like that's going to make that sell a lot easier.
And to your point, Jen, I agree 100%. And to your point, there used to be, before COVID, I believe there was a barrier to entry to producing decent video content, right? Because we all had this idea that we had to go out with a camera crew into the field or go into a studio and all that. And one thing that COVID changed 1,000% was everybody during COVID started creating video content through virtual meetings and through Zoom and whatever platform you use. That changed the game right there, because that made it so that you didn't need budget to create video content, or limited budget at least. And so at that point, we had to rely on let the content drive things, because it wasn't going to be the production value that drove things at that point, because nobody was leaving their home. It was going to be the content, the personalities, the demeanor of your C-suite or whoever was speaking up for you. So I think that oftentimes companies, startups that I talk to all the time, think that video creation is, to this day, cost prohibitive. And I say it's not, because yes, there are those times, believe me, when you need high production values and it needs to look really slick. There are also those times, however, that you just have to put a face to the company or a personality. Get your CEO out there, get your head of sales out there, things like that, explaining from them, because they know the company and what you're offering, and the differentiators, all the things, they know it better than anybody else. And so, I think that it's not as expensive as people think it is. And one thing I'm super proud of, along with my team, when we were at Demandbase, we did create something called DBTV, which was the first B2B streaming network, which had shows by persona. So literally we had 10 or 12 different shows that were all geared toward a different persona, whether it was marketing or marketing ops or sales ops or AEs or SDRs, you name it, across all of the acronyms that you can name. And, above and beyond winning awards for it and getting media coverage for it, what we started to see was the engagement go up. And we started to see people, really referencing content in other conversations that they were having with our company and things like that. And ultimately, yeah, that started to drive. It took a little bit of time, but it ultimately started to drive pipeline, and it equipped marketers and sales with actual relevant content that they could use either in their nurture campaigns, or we used it on social, or, depending on how you wanted to reach that particular audience. And we were super proud of that because we did have the buy-in from the executives. So that was great. We had to get the buy-in, had the buy-in, executed it, and it worked. And it was, it was kind of all a match made in heaven. Doesn't always work that way, but it kind of proved the hypothesis of, we need a different way to reach people because email ain't working. And, and I know a lot of marketers hate to hear that, but just think about it. How many emails do you delete in a given day? I delete most. So if that doesn't tell you something,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I want to ask a lot about the content studio and DVTV. I have so many questions about that and how you kind of got that spun up. The thing about the video content becoming a lot more accessible today, creating that, I think is so important. There isn't an expectation as a consumer of that video that it's highly produced. I think it just leveled the playing field for everyone. And I've gotten requests to like, hey, I'm putting together a video on this topic. Could you send me something with your perspective? And they specifically ask me to not be sitting at my desk, be like out walking your dog or, in the grocery aisle. There is this like desire for human connection in a more empathetic way, as opposed to a professional, you have to be super buttoned up. And I love that we've gone in that direction, but I do think that happened during COVID when everybody was just sort of craving that connection. But yeah, I want to ask about the content studio and the streaming hub. Can you walk us through the journey of getting that spun up and what were the steps to get it going?
Yeah, it was a journey. So the steps to getting that going were get buy-in, get some budget, figure out the platform that you were going to use. We ended up using a platform called Folloze, Folloze, because it had the functionality that we kind of wanted that also integrated it with our website. So that was important. So it was that. But literally, it was just a ton of the team sitting around and brainstorming, like, what would you want to watch? What would you want to consume? It was going on a road show in our company. We had about 1,000 employees at the time, but it was going on a road show and asking each of these personas, what do you watch? What do you read? What would interest you? What should we be creating? So it was a lot of going both ways conversations, and standing it up was actually the pretty easy part. I mean, I say easy and my team's going to laugh or shake their head, my former team. But so, I mean, I don't want to simplify it too much, but the real sort of hard work was more in the ideation. And sure, you had the design of the platform and how are we going to tag it? And then all of that. And then how are we going to be integrated with the rest of the company? How's demand gen going to use this? How is sales going to use this? How do we, and I'll just say that no matter what size company you work for, I believe you have to get internally, you have to get the employees excited if you want something to succeed. Like everybody has to buy in and be like, oh, wow, we have this, blah, blah, blah. This is great. We're going to use it in this way. We can use it in this way and the other. So standing it up was that. And then it was a matter of creating the content. And now this was smack dab in the middle of COVID or beginning part of COVID. So we did a lot through a tool called Vocal Video, which I'm a big fan of. Pretty easy video capture tool that you can use. So we use Vocal Video for a lot of it. We did go out and shoot some things. But the goal in the beginning was to launch with 100 pieces of content. I think we launched with 80. So launch with 80 pieces of content to kind of show the marketplace that this was for real, that we weren't just like, oh, it's like a glorified YouTube channel. No, it was broken down by persona, with very clear, it was clear based on the title of each show, based on the description, the audience for that show. And we also brought our podcast under this umbrella. And so it ended up being a real multimedia experience, again, that didn't break the bank. I mean, everything's relative. So if you have $10 to spend, you're going to spend $10. If you have 100,000 to spend, you're going to spend 100,000. If you have a million, and so on. But I don't think these projects have to be cost prohibitive, and you can start on a very small level. The other thing that we learned through our brainstorming was use your employee base as content creators too. You just mentioned people, were asking for video of you walking your dog and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you have a captive audience within your organization. So have them make some user-generated content that can go on social, that can certainly be used when you're talking about, salespeople trying to brand themselves and their organization. I mean, I've seen some really good salespeople that have built up their profiles on LinkedIn to the point where it has enhanced their selling ability, 100-fold, because they're creating useful content for their audience.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, there's so many, there's so many things I want to break down even further, but talk to me a little bit about, that the integration with the rest of the teams internally. And, you mentioned right at the start, right? People don't know how to measure the ROI of work like this. So when you think about how is the demand gen team going to use this, how is sales going to use this? What were some of the ways that proved to be most effective to then turning into actual ROI for the business?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. And, what I always tell content creators is before you create any content, you have to have a distribution plan. How are we going to use this? Who's it targeted at? What's the audience? And so we actually put together a playbook, during the process, and then closer to launch really fleshed it out. But we had a playbook, for example, how can sales use this? How can we create content that's specifically for sales enablement that they need? And you're not going to get all sorts of buy-in on day one until you start to show that, oh, wow, okay, this nurture email that contained a link to this video got X number of opens. And, and obviously there's a lot that goes into demand gen. But I think the key for us was defining the audiences and the personas. And we had a really good CMO who was really attuned to personas and was really good at that part of it. So I think that was a necessary part. So it was basically a matter of talking to all the subject matter experts within the company, deciding on what can our KPIs be here? Like, how will we measure this? And we were a data company, essentially. So we were able to measure what pieces of content a prospect, hopefully turn customer, actually engage with during their journey. So we could actually see, did they watch this video, which then drove them to this blog, which then drove them to ask for a demo of the product, and then they became a customer, or whatever the sort of buyer's journey in that case is. And so we also use that. We learned a lot from that, and we use that to then kind of inform the types of content that we, should be creating, from there, that actually interests prospects, that interests, customers even after they're customers, because you have to think about that also. The day somebody becomes a customer, that's not the day you're done with them. I mean, you have to nurture that relationship. You have to continue to show your value to that customer. You might have cross-sell and upsell opportunities to that customer, and you can create content around that. So like, to me, the content engine never really stops. I mean, and that's why I always say it's a huge missed opportunity, I believe, for companies that don't have true content teams, or at least a very small iteration of it, because content can help on so many levels. It can help, recruit employees on your careers page on LinkedIn if it's done right. It can help build morale within your company. There's so many different audiences that content can reach. Pipeline, obviously, you want to drive pipeline and all that, but in addition to that, there's so much, just so much use for content.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and I think just what you talked about, the defining and understanding the needs of the audience and understanding the buyer's journey, or then the post-sale journey as well, creating content that aligns to the needs of your audience. Like, you have to understand who they are, what they care about, and what's going to be useful for them in order to create something that's actually going to impact them. And then I love hearing that you created a playbook for how other teams, why you should care about this and how you can use it and how it's going to be helpful for you. You said that earlier, like, get everybody excited about it, and kind of all rowing in that same direction, so that you're, maximizing the opportunity, because it's not a small piece of effort to come up with 80 pieces of content to launch something like this. So it's not like that just comes out of thin air. So making sure that you're maximizing that opportunity is so critical.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Jen. And I think another missed opportunity that happens in a lot of companies is this idea of one and done, that there's this piece of content, it's used on LinkedIn, and now we're done with it. See, I always urge my teams, let's come up with 10 ways that the same piece of content can be used. So just because you post it on LinkedIn once doesn't mean you can't post it again 2 weeks later. In fact, you can, there's studies out there that show that people don't normally catch it the first time around, but that's just one small example. But like, if we have this video, what's every way we can use it? We can use it internally on our internal channels. We can use it externally on social. We can use it in nurture emails. We can use it in events. Why not? Why not kick off your event or your webinar with a pre-produced piece of video? So now all of a sudden you have one piece of content, but you've just come up with 6, 7, 10 ways to use it. So the investment in that piece of content is now almost like amortized across, 10. So it's almost like you created 10 pieces of content with this one. And that's always get the right people in the room, figure out how everybody can use this, rather than just saying, okay, got a video, we put it on, DBTV, our streaming platform, we're done with it. It's just going to live there. That's fine. It can live there, but is it also going on YouTube? What's the plan for social, for internal, for sales, for marketing, blah, blah, blah. Do we create a blog from that content? Is there here's the thing. And then I promise I will be quiet, but here's how I always tell people to start. Do a 1-hour interview with somebody, the CEO, the CMO, whoever, 1-hour video interview. Get them to commit to 1 hour. Out of that 1 hour, you should be able to come up with a series of blogs, a series of video clips that you can use for social, and a bunch of other ideas. That is an hour really well spent, that if you can't come up with 20 pieces of content from an hour of interviewing the CEO or the CMO or the CFO, whatever you're going for, that's the starting point. And I think that gets people into that sort of motion of, wow, content really can drive all of the other efforts that we're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree. We like to say that we'd like to throw content a parade. We want to use it until it's dead, right? Like we want to use suck the life out of every piece of content because it's hard. Creating content is not easy. And so you want to maximize that. You've got to use it a million different ways. And I love that tip. Like an hour's interview is like packed with stuff. There's so much in there that you can use in a lot of different ways. But I hear that a lot from people that saying like, they feel this pressure to constantly create something new. Like we created something, what's next? What's next? What's next? Rather than just sitting with what you have and making sure that everybody sees it. It's in every format and every possible way. So it's so important to do that. And I want to back up too. We started talking a little bit about like the KPIs that kind of lead you to what success looks like for all this different content because, a blog is going to perform differently than a video and social. And ultimately, we're trying to prove ROI. So, what are what does success look like for something like this, and what KPIs should teams be looking at to track as leading indicators?
Yeah, so I always say there's qualitative and then there's quantitative. And I know that demand gen folks will cringe at the idea of qualitative, which is, an email from somebody saying, wow, that was an amazing video, or I really found this video interesting, or a comment on your YouTube channel or under the video that says, this really helped with XYZ. So that's kind of qualitative / anecdotal. I think from a quantitative standpoint, and I'll start with video, you have all the kind of vanity metrics of views and engagement, average time watched that you can track and things like that. But if you go a layer deeper, and you can use Google Analytics to do this on kind of a basic level, or, at Demandbase, we could track everything. But literally, you could see, which of we could match prospect accounts with who was engaging with the content. And so it takes a bit of an investment in tracking it that way. But that was very important to our company to see ultimately, the journey of the prospect and what they consumed on the way to becoming a customer. So I think that for us, those were the big KPIs. How many new prospects were we bringing in? In other words, how many prospects were making a touch point with some of our content? And then how many were consuming multiple pieces of content along the way to becoming a customer or not becoming a customer. So there's that too. But I also want to stress that the KPI game is a shared game. So somebody can create the best content in the world, but if you're not getting it out there on social, if you're not using it in nurtures, if you're not using it in webinars, if you're not using it at events, if you're not bringing it up in sales conversations and sending people links, if everybody isn't doing the thing, you're not going to see good metrics. Because again, there's a lot of content out there right now. And that's why I said it also has to be relevant, because the reality is there's too much content out there. So the more that your content can be relevant and distributed in the right way to the right audiences and not spamming them, and it's a real integrated effort across the whole company, that's how it's going to work. And that's really that's where kind of the gold lies.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's that rising tide, right? The rising tide lifts all boats, and you've got to be, kind of focused on all those different areas. I've seen a lot like ad campaigns that don't necessarily produce conversions, but when those ads are live, your organic performance boosts, or your direct traffic to your site, or conversions increase that are direct conversions or organic conversion. That's not an accident, right? And I think that that's a big shift that's happened in marketing over the last 15 years or so, where it's not a single touch point that's leading to a conversion that we need to look at from an attribution perspective. It's campaign wide, or it's account wide, as you mentioned. Like you've got a list of target accounts, you have an account based strategy that you're working off of. Well, when you're putting the right content in front of those target accounts, is it lifting the engagement of that account as a whole? And that's hard to track because non-marketers are looking for that conversion metric, that ROI metric, that return on ad spend, which when you think about more of an omni-channel or sort of create once, publish everywhere strategy, then it gets a little bit complicated to track because everything's layered on, the success is layered on top of each other.
100%. Yep. I agree with all that.
Yeah. Well, tell me, I want to go back to, you talked about buy-in, having buy-in for a process like this, whether that's from the employees and how they engage with it, but from the C-suite in building something like this. How do you respond if there's any pushback when you're trying to get that buy-in to investing in this type of approach?
Yeah, there's always going to be pushback. I mean, you know that. There's always going to, whenever you're spending $1 or even 50 cents, there's going to be pushback. And I think the reality is, it's content people generally aren't salespeople, but it's almost like you're trying to sell something to your executives, selling them on this idea. And, and it takes sometimes a hard sell, which is, if we don't do this, our competition, either A, our competition's already doing this and look at this. B, if we don't set the bar here, our competition is going to do it because we know they're going to. And so let's be trendsetters. Let's be out on the front edge of this. And of course, bring some research that shows, companies that utilize content in the right way see X% more conversions. There's a lot of data out there. Gartner has data, and other companies that track these sorts of things have data. So again, I go back to the qualitative versus quantitative. I think the sell is, here's where I've seen it work. Here's other companies doing it. So look at this. And then 3, here's the data that research is showing that will predict the results if we do this right. So I think if you do those 3 things, that's how you get buy-in, and that's how you respond to pushback.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of showing that evidence. I mean, aside from DBTV, do you see any others that you think are doing it really well right now?
There are a lot of companies at this point doing content well, of all sizes. I mean, I hate to just shout out, different ones. Salesforce does a really good job, with their content. There's a million B2C brands. And I also think that ultimately we're going to see eventually a very blurred line between B2B and B2C, because like I said, we're all selling to people who in my mind are C's. So even though we're selling into businesses, there has to be that human element. There has to be empathy to what they need, what problems they're trying to solve. And so I think ultimately we are going to see a lot more of a B2C approach to B2B.
Yeah. Well, and to your point earlier, I mean, people from a content perspective, especially, like your B2B content is competing with Netflix, it's competing with Instagram, it's competing with, playing video games. Like, you're not just competing with your direct competitor for B2B content. You're competing with cat videos and, other stuff. So,
and that's why, Jen, I talk about relevance, because you're never going to compete on a playing field production wise with any of the platforms that you mentioned. But where you can compete is giving people content that actually either helps them do their day-to-day job, helps them drive results, that ultimately helps their company and gets them raises and things like that, and that is relevant so that they can have smarter conversations with whoever they're talking to. It's really about all of those things, because yes, we are all competing for eyeballs, and people only have a very small window of the time that they can dedicate to eyeballs for this type of content. So you better show the value either for their careers, for their in their day-to-day, how they can help their customers, how it can drive revenue, one of those things, because if not, then they're not going to consume your content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to ask too about AI, how AI is changing the game for content today, whether that's creating content from the beginning, but I'm thinking especially about scaling content operations. Like, what are you seeing on the AI side of content creation, and maybe some recommendations you have for doing it right?
I mean, first of all, I think we're only scratching the surface of AI and the value that it can drive for businesses. From a content perspective, I think AI has certain really good use cases. For example, headline ideas for your content or potentially blog ideas. What I don't think AI is good at is you can spot an AI generated blog from a mile away. And the
Mhm.
minute that I see that, I tune out because it's humanless. It lacks empathy. It's all fact based. And so I think there is a place for AI. For example, I think AI can do a good job with transcripts of interviews, giving you ideas for blog posts. I think that's good. But so I always say AI for my teams, AI can be a starting point for ideation and things like that. It should not be the content creation arm of your company because your content isn't going to stand out that way, and it's just going to go into this sea of monotony. And so again, I think as we move along, we're going to see a lot of more really good use cases for AI in content. But again, I think it's more on the ideation side and the aggregation side than it is like, for example, if I have 10 company blogs and I'm like, I want to make a top 10 list or something. Well, you can put all 10 blogs into Chat GPT or whatever and give it instructions and it'll spit out something that's pretty decent. But
Mhm.
those were blogs that were created by humans, not by AI.
Yeah, I think that's so important, that the original piece of content has to be created by a human, that you can use AI to then maybe restructure it, or, put it in a new format, or like you said, combine some things, or maybe split something, or
Yep.
whatever. But that original content can't be generated by AI. Like you said, it lacks humanity. And not only do people spot it from a mile away, but Google does too. So if you
Oh
have
yeah,
any sort of organic search strategy, SEO strategy, it's not going to rank. So AI is not
1,000%.
for creating content. I love AI for, cutting up videos, taking an hour
Yeah.
long video and having it create those snippets for me. The amount of time that those tools save in video editing and things like that, it is a great way to scale content. But again, like the conversation you and I are having right now is human and organic, and we can't have this conversation with AI.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. AI is great for efficiencies,
Yeah.
looking for places where you can be more efficient. It's not a good place to look for creativity.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a great way to put it. Well, I mean, I can't thank you enough for talking through this with me today. This is, I am a big believer in a content strategy, and I think it can be hard to sell into businesses sometimes, but I'm going to keep beating that drum and talking to experts like you that have proven that that it works and it's valuable. And yeah, hopefully somebody learned something today. I know I did.
I hope so. Thanks for having me, Jen. Good to see you.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find Jon on LinkedIn to continue the conversation about transforming your B2B marketing with media company principles. I'll be back with another episode soon. And in